Okay, it's Phil Lee returning with another episode of Civil War Chat. Today is Tuesday, the 25th of May, 2021. And what I want to talk about today is how the recent anti-Semitic attacks on Jews in America might have been avoided if we had paid more attention to the cultural genocide that has been in progress in the South for years. A lot of people don't know, for example, that of the 11 states of the Confederacy, the 11 states that entered the Confederacy, um, two of those states had Jewish senators in the antebellum era. None of the northern states did. None of them did. So let me pull up my notes here and sort of get into what I want to say. Ben Shapiro, David Rubin, and Dennis Prager are successful, politically conservative podcasters who happen to be Jewish. Prager and Shapiro are orthodox. Each of the three is outraged by the recent surge in random street attacks on Jews in American cities, such as New York and Los Angeles, by domestic Palestinian advocates. Some of the victims were targeted merely for wearing Yamakas, a symbol that obviously enraged their adversaries on sight. But these three broadcasters justifiably lament that America seems to be heading down a path toward pre-1950 European-style anti-Semitism, while our elite, both the phony and authentic types of elite, either acquiesce to this or even sympathize with the movement. The three should have seen the anti-Semitism coming when those same elites demonized Southerners, tore down our statues, and rampaged on a mission of Southern cultural genocide. While few Southerners have been physically attacked for displaying the Confederate flag, it has happened. And no doubt it would happen more often if the flag was simply not banished elsewhere. We've seen incidences when people in places like Illinois and New England have displayed the flag, and people just call the police to have them take the flag down. They don't have to engage in direct violence against them. They just have the police come and force them to take down the symbol because they don't like the symbol. Well, nonetheless, it would happen. Violence against people displaying the Confederate battle flag would no doubt happen more often if the symbol had not been banished in most states, including in the South. More often, admittedly, more often, such persons displaying the Confederate battle flag are ostracized, lose their jobs, or are thrown out of school. Now, ironically, Southern fundamentalist Christians are among Israel's strongest supporters, notwithstanding that comparatively few Jews live in the region. Consider, for example, Senators Cotton, Hawley, and Cruz have all publicly denounced Hamas. Now, although I don't know, maybe none of those three senators from Arkansas, Missouri, and Texas may wish to defend Confederate memorials, but it is likely that many of their constituents do. Yet Shapiro, Rubin, and Prager have said nothing in defense of Confederate memorials. Nothing while the culture is torn down. Prager and Rubin have even attacked them. Prager distributed a biased video by former West Point historian Ty Sedgley that puts all of the blame on the South for the war between the states and moreover demonizes Southerners. Rubin interviewed Professor Jeffrey Hummel, who made similar remarks. Now, although Hummel is a good historian, his comments that day were one-sided. Now, after commenting about 5 years ago that some of the tanks the army tanks that freed European concentration camp prisoners during World War II flew the Confederate battle flag, Shapiro has since avoided the topic of Confederate memory. Now, I can't be sure because I don't watch his show anymore. After the New York Times wrote a big article about him several years ago, Ben increasingly seems to want to be on the good side of corporate media. In short, he has become about as useful as George W. Bush, in terms of advocating for free speech and controlled immigration. Although the three podcasters complain consistently, almost on every podcast, they complain that the mainstream press ignores them. Each has ignored Southern heritage defenders on their own shows because they do not give them any airtime. While all three of those podcasters have been enthusiastically greeted on Southern speaking tours, where they collect donations to support their podcasts. They provide their podcast audiences with no chance to hear a defense of Confederate memorials. They simply buy into the academic demonization of antebellum Southerners as the America's evil twin, and actually as America's evil twin for 100 years after the Civil War. They know that advocates like me cannot get a voice on corporate media, yet they take our donations and deny us any voice on their shows. Yet the anti-Southern cultural genocide is both massive and reckless. The podcasters should be aware that widespread statue destruction historically is often followed by bloodshed. Just as Germany made Paul Hindenburg chancellor in the early 1830s to keep a lid on Hitler, so America has made Joe Biden president to keep a lid on Kamala Harris and similar radicals. Since Hindenburg did not stop Hitler, Shapiro, Prager, and Rubin should appreciate that Biden might not stop Harris or some other demagogue underling who has a mission of anti-Semitism. Presently, it is more important than ever for these three pundits to realize that it is in their own best interest to give Confederate heritage defenders a chance to make our case. We're denied corporate media. And if we're denied their media, then we're just lost in the weeds of the internet. Now, these three podcasters may freely reject our arguments. I've got no problem with that, but they should not assume that they've heard our arguments. They should not assume that what all we have to say is some sort of a disparaged, quote, lost cause, close quote, explanation. Hear what we had to say before labeling us lost causers or something like that. We have been far more ignored and censored than they. Should they continue to throw us under the bus, Shapiro, Prager, and Rubin need not be surprised when the cultural elite escalates its attacks on Israel and American Jews. After they have totally demonized Confederate memory, the elites and the phony elites will be looking for new targets. Well, I had my say on that, but I've had a lot of talks recently about Reconstruction, and I want to give you some recommendations on books for Southern Reconstruction. Now, the standard textbook that the colleges use today is by Eric Foner, which was written in the late 1980s. It's pretty thorough, but its total objective is to focus on the experience for Blacks. The whites are not covered at all, except as a way to treat them as a foil, as persons who were involved in nothing but abusing Blacks. That's his whole purpose. For example, when he covers the Memphis riots in 1866 and the New Orleans riot in 1874, which turned out to be race riots in the end, they were, he doesn't explain that it wasn't the Confederates in Mississippi that did that. It wasn't the ex-Confederates. The ex-Confederates had no vote. They could not vote in Tennessee at that time, nor could they hold any office. The municipal government was controlled by whites, but they were immigrants, primarily Irish. And in Louisiana in 1874, the conflict at Liberty Place, as I've explained in earlier episodes, was really a conflict between the militias of two competing state governments. Now, I've heard one federal employee who works at a U.S. grant historical site explained that, well, no, it was the Southern whites against a legitimately elected government in Louisiana. No. It was not a legitimately elected government. That's why there were two governments and two militias. But you see, Foner overlooks that. He just says, well, this many whites were killed and this many blacks were killed. And that's all he really wants to convey. That's really all he wants to convey. Just watch his lectures. You can go on YouTube and get all of his lectures on the Civil War and Reconstruction. They're on YouTube. And just he was at Columbia when he did those. Now, a more thorough, even more thorough, but far, far more balanced textbook is this one, The Story of Reconstruction by Robert Self Henry. It was written in the 1930s, but certainly for that time, and even by today's standards, in many respects, he is quite sensitive to the experience of the Black American in the South. He's quite sympathetic to it, but he does not ignore the misrule of the carpetbag regimes. And he spells out how these so-called riots happened. They didn't just spontaneously spring up like spontaneous combustion, as Eric Foner and his acolytes would have you believe. No. That's not what happened. There were triggering events behind it, and the triggering events were often were caused by misrule of carpetbag regimes or radical Republican scallywag regimes. The biggest problem with The Story of Reconstruction by Robert Self Henry is that it is exhaustive. If you don't know much about Reconstruction, unless you're a lot smarter than me, or certainly smarter than me, you're going to have a hard time getting through that book. I mean that sincerely. So what I recommend is to get started with my own book. There's a little over 200 pages, Philip Lee on Southern Reconstruction. And I break it down into not only is it a smaller book, but it's, I think, more readable. I don't want to emphasize that. Robert Self Henry has good command of the language, So his book is readable, but it is so highly detailed that it's easy to get confused and lost. If you get my book, Southern Reconstruction, it's going to help you have the proper framework. You'll have the proper outlines of what you need to know before you get into Robert Self Henry's book. Now, if you want a copy of this, an autographed copy, you can get it from me personally by emailing me, Phil, PHIL _ Lee, LEIGH @me.com. It's $25, and I will cover the postage here in the United States. Now, if you don't want an autographed copy, you can get it for $22 at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. So that's our show for today, and thanks for watching.